Got another one lined up, haven't we? Next one, somewhere.
Hello, yes, it's Beth Johnson here from Speak Up for Women.
Aha.
Hi.
Hello. Right, welcome.
Thank you. Tēnā koutou.
It just takes a little while. It's not quite like walking into the room. You sort of walked into the room, but it's a bit slower. So welcome, Beth, and the floor's yours for 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much for hearing me today. I represent the hundreds of active members of Speak Up for Women and thousands of our supporters. It's taken us a long time to get here to this point today. And in the meantime, we have been subjected to a smear campaign by those who wish for this bill to pass unscrutinised. But the reality is that speaking about the potential impacts of new law on sex-based rights is not anti-trans. Adults who claim that it is are responsible for increasing the distress felt by some vulnerable young people. And I cannot express strongly enough how saddened and angry I am at that framing and the hurt that it has caused young people by adults who should know better. I'm not directing these comments at this committee, but at our media and certain MPs. We strongly support the rights of transgender people to live their lives free from violence and discrimination and fear, to not be discriminated against, for example, in employment and housing and healthcare. And we support more funding and more research into the needs and health of this community. We strongly reject the depiction of Speak Up for Women as anti-trans. All we believe is that sex, biological and gender are different, and that just sometimes in specific circumstances, sex matters. This belief is worthy of respect in a democratic society, as a High Court judge in the UK recently ruled in the four-starter case. We have not had this respect to date in New Zealand, but I expect that we will have it now. So I'll now talk to our concerns with the bill, and this is to be read alongside our submission that goes into detail with our recommendations. So at the heart of this bill is a contradiction, a very serious contradiction. The government states that this bill will not impact the existing rights to single-sex services, but at the same time says this change is necessary to enable transgender people to access services without being outed. That's the contradiction, because if a male person uses an altered birth certificate to gain entrance, for example, to a girls' school without being outed, then they've gained entrance by subterfuge. This undermines the rights of girls at the school as well as the right of the school to provide a single-sex service. So we ask, do New Zealand school children still have the right to a single-sex education? If the answer is yes, then how in practice can schools establish the sex of an applicant for the purposes of determining eligibility? How in fact is any agency, sports team or female-only service provider meant to assess a person's sex if not via their birth certificate? Birth certificates are not required to gain entrance to these spaces. But what about in the event of any doubt or dispute about somebody's eligibility? Must service providers now risk going to court to discover somebody's birth sex? How distressing would that be for everyone involved? Whilst some female-only service providers are comfortable including trans women in their services, others highly value their single-sex status and the comfort that provides their service users. Examples from Canada, one of the first countries in the world to implement sex self-ID, are instructive. In 1995, the Vancouver Rape Relief and Women's Shelter refused training to a trans-identified male called Kimberly Nixon, who applied to become a counsellor at the centre. Nixon filed a human rights case against the shelter and fought the shelter for 10 years. It was finally settled in favour of the shelter by the Supreme Court. But over those years, it cost the shelter $100,000 to defend their female-only status. This case illustrates that if New Zealand enacts law based on sex self-ID, at some point it will be financially stressed and under-resourced women's organisations and services that will need to defend their legitimacy in a lengthy and costly court process. We're also concerned that the proposed review in 5 years' time could not possibly measure the real impact of the erosion of women's women's rights. How will women and girls excluding themselves from services and opportunities be tracked? Impact is already occurring in New Zealand. In the last 3 years since we formed Speak Up for Women, I've received a growing number of anecdotal reports about the negative impact of sex self-ID policies that are moving ahead of this proposed law. I'll just give you one example from earlier this year when a mother got in touch with me to tell me that her 10-year-old daughter now travels home from the pool each week in wet togs because a male-bodied person uses the women's changing rooms at the same time as her. The service provider believed they were required to permit this as the male-bodied person was transgender. Does the government believe that people with a penis should have the right to undress in front of young girls? This bill sends a message that it does. We, however, believe that bodies sometimes matter more than identities. The hostile environment surrounding this issue is such that almost no one who contacts us wants to speak publicly, and instead they do burden us with their stories. And I can't blame them for not wanting to speak out, because who would want to be publicly derided by their own government as transphobic? My blood ran cold recently when we started our advertising campaign, and I saw firsthand for myself what real transphobia looks like. There were several terrifying comments on our Facebook page on the ads that we ran, trying to raise awareness about this submission process. So I'll just give you one example from someone called Brody, who commented, "I don't care how you identify. If I find a man in the bathroom around my daughter, they're going to need a dentist to determine his identity." There was an expletive there. But that really illustrated to me just how much this bill endangers trans people, especially young people, by making them believe that they have rights that they do not. They risk assault when they encounter somebody like Brody, or at least humiliation when they encounter a service provider intent on upholding their single-sex status. So gender minorities, Aotearoa, I think we'll hear from them or have heard from them, are a support charity that receive government funding to support transgender youth. Now, they for a long time have been misrepresenting the law, claiming that trans women are legally women in New Zealand. So let's be clear, it's not feminists like myself who are endangering vulnerable youth. It is misleading and muddied laws and irresponsible NGOs that are doing that. So my friend Diane Sparks is a transsexual. She's made a submission and she really wanted to make an oral submission, but she's currently in hospital having suffered a medical event. So these are her words that I told her I would read for you. Transsexuals want to change their sex. That means hormones and surgery. They don't deviate from this desire for physical bodily change. Sex self-identification as a human rights issue referred to the right for transsexuals to decide on surgery for themselves rather than the medical establishment gatekeeping. It was never meant that the legal sex should be changed by self-identification without bodily change occurring. Transgender is a new term that allows autogynephiles, transvestites, and cross-dressers to co-opt public empathy for transsexuals, to push for access to women's spaces for their own gratification. This is harming us, and this government has fallen for it. I stand with Speak Up for Women against this incursion. So those are Diane's words. We are told that no one will take advantage of sex self-ID to access women and children, but it has already happened. Just one example, in California, where they enacted sex self-identification laws this year, subsequently, a registered sex offender with a history of indecent exposure charges presented at We Spa in LA. Visitors at the spa can use the facilities naked. Given he was legally female, he was allowed to use the women's facilities. He allegedly became erect while naked in the presence of a 9-year-old girl and was arrested earlier this month. But our concerns are not actually limited to these few egregious bad actors, though there is potential there. But because no change in physiology or appearance will now be required, males who self-identify as females may be indistinguishable from the general population of males. This is changing our social understanding of what a transgender person is. So how will male access to female public facilities possibly be regulated? According to the Human Rights Act, these spaces exist for the reasons of safety and decency. So currently access is regulated by social contract, where providers and users of these services know their rights and will insist on them when necessary. But this social contract will disintegrate under this law. Because sex self-ID requires no medical or even appearance change, society will change their understanding of how a transgender person, how a trans woman looks. And then nobody wants to be called a bigot for challenging somebody in a female space. So women will lose their confidence to challenge a male who presents as a man in a woman's space. There'll be no way of knowing if the person is a gender non-conforming trans woman or a man. This is dangerous. This not being able to challenge people, stopping challenging males and female spaces is dangerous for trans women as well as for women and children. So in conclusion, rights must be debated if change is to be lasting and meaningful. Example, the Black Civil Rights Movement made a really strong moral case and won the majority of public support before becoming law. And it was the same with the gay rights movement. They made their moral case. The activists, however, in this space have said no debate, and our existence is not up for debate. And that's because these activists know that if debate were to occur, as it is starting to now, that the demand for sex self-identification would be exposed not as a right at all, but as an extraordinary demand to impose on the existing rights of women. There hasn't been public debate on this issue. It's been positioned as a human right, and any opponents as bigots. The New Zealand public doesn't support this. Vote Compass data shows that 47% of Kiwis oppose it and only 29% support it. In Ireland, a backlash is growing. They were one of the first countries to pass sex self-ID along with Canada. So the impacts are just being seen now in these countries. But there's a backlash growing against the government as the negative consequences manifest. And people have become aware that this law was passed without their knowledge. So we'd implore you not to make this mistake here. There isn't enough public awareness of the issues, and the concerns of Crown law have not been adequately addressed, and all of that's covered in our written submission. If sex self-ID is right, then the government should make the case for it and win over the majority. Because as the bill stands, it isn't kind or inclusive to transsexuals, transgender people, and not least to women and girls. Thank you.
Beth, thank you. I've got a lineup of questions. I'll start with Deborah.
Thank you for your submission, Beth. I have, I'll just take two questions because I appreciate there are other people who want to ask questions as well. I just want to ask about, first of all, the membership of Speak Up for Women. You say you have 200 odd active members and then you claim thousands of other supporters. On what basis is that?
So we have I hesitate to say it because of how many times it's been infiltrated, but we have a private discussion group on Facebook, and we have over 200 engaged members in that discussion group who help with our campaigning. And when I say we have thousands of supporters, that's based on over 5,000 social media followers. That's based on our email distribution list. That's based on the number of donations that come in.
Okay, so all right, so that's interesting then that you sort of, it's the Speak Up for Women and you claim that you're representing New Zealand women. So no,
not all New Zealand women do.
Right, I want to contrast that with the National Council of Women who are speaking to us next, who have over 450 individual members and of course about 200 organisations affiliated. So they could very clearly represent New Zealand women.
Well, I challenge you to look at their social media engagement because they don't get anywhere near as much engagement on their social media posts as we do. So I don't think just purely looking at the numbers, I mean, they've been around for 100 years or so. I don't think that's a fair comparison. And I don't know why it's relevant, Deborah. Are you trying to say that what we've said is irrelevant? Could you address the content of what we've said and not, who we are? Because, please refute any of our points.
I think please. Claims about who you represent are important. Now, I do want to address some of the what have you said in the content. So the larger part of the content of your submission was about the risks or dangers that having trans women in women's spaces would represent. However, so it seems that that's the one-way risk direction. Would it be permissible then for this law to go through in respect of trans men but not of trans women, seeing as the danger seems to be around trans women?
That's a fascinating question. Look, Deborah, absolutely. There's evidence that transitioned males who have transitioned to live as females retain male patterns of violence. So that's not to say they're more violent than other males, but they are more violent than females because that's what the data shows us. No, so I'm getting towards answering your question. So our focus has been on protecting the rights of women and girls. So I guess off the fly, yes, I would say absolutely.
But we could put a law for enabling trans men to change their gender on their birth certificate, but not trans women.
Off the top of my head, Deborah, I cannot see any negative impact on the rights of women and girls if you allow that.
Okay.
So, yes, I can't see any negatives.
Let's move on to Elizabeth.
Hilda, thank you. Reading your materials always interesting, because I would say as a general rule, if you don't want to be accused of transphobia is perhaps don't say transphobic things. And I would just wanted to clarify that under the Education and Training Act, single-sex schools are allowed to accept students of, or they call it the opposite sex. So there are actually transgender children across our country already fitting in well, accepted by their students, teachers and schools.
With everybody's agreement though, Elizabeth, we're well aware of that, but that's with the agreement of the schools. We're talking about this concept of not being outed, because not every school has to accept a transgender student. In fact, a girls' boarding school, for example, can, if they want, under the current law, uphold their rights to be single sex. Or are you saying that that's no longer the case?
No, I'm just saying.
No, but would you clarify, please? Because I understand that there are services that welcome transgender women, and that's great. But do women still have the right to provide single-sex services?
Okay, let me clarify for you that this is a select committee where we get to ask you the questions about your submission. So I would like to ask you, because one of the issues you raise, you say that if transgender people would not be subject to the violence of the example you gave of one of your supporters, yes, who would like to enact violence, and of course, there's no research whatsoever in this country that trans women are harming women and children. What we do have is considerable and not information we'd have to get from overseas, material produced here in this country that says actually the violence is against trans women. But are you suggesting, because I wrote down what you said, but you said that perhaps if it would be best if they didn't do this, because then they would be more protected or wouldn't likely get harmed because they weren't trying to be women, because they will get hurt if they try to pretend to be women, because your basic analysis is that they're never women. They might be called trans women, but you have consistently called them men.
No, I haven't called them men.
No,
sorry.
You repeatedly called them men.
No, I didn't. I called them trans-identified males because they are male, and language is really important when we're talking about law.
So that you just called them men. Yeah, so male.
Male. So they're male. Yeah, but they are. Yeah. So do you want me to answer it, because it was a question, or?
Oh, I'd have to defer to our chair because I'm aware of time. Sorry.
I think we're out of time.
Okay.
But I'll just go very quickly to Rachel, provided it's quick, Rachel.
Thanks, Beth. Look,
it's a question.
Yes, it's very much a question, but particularly following your presentation in Nelson, where I was contacted by constituents who were concerned about access to women's refuge, and having been a board member for that organisation for a number of years. Were you aware that Women's Refuge has a policy to allow trans women to access their spaces? I just wanted to know if you were aware of that.
Yes, I am aware of that. I refer you to the Vancouver Rape Relief Crisis example, though.
I'm talking about New Zealand Women's Refuge, and that they have a policy to allow women's, I'm just checking that you're aware they have a policy. And that, unfortunately, were you aware some women in Nelson were concerned about Women's Refuge following that presentation, but based on inaccurate information? That was my question.
What inaccurate information?
That trans women would be able to access a woman's space and hurt them and their children. That was the understanding. Well, those were the questions that came to me from constituents following the presentation in Nelson. I was just wanting, you talked about misinformation, so I just wanted to clarify, were you aware that there was some misinformation put into my electorate based on inaccurate information about women's refuge policies, and were you aware of the correct policies? Just wanted to make sure.
We've never referred to women's refuge policies. We've never talked about the policies.
Thank you.
No, we've never talked about the policies. We've talked about the law.
Right, but you're aware that their policy is to allow trans women into their spaces?
Rachel, yes, I am aware of that.
Excellent, pleased to hear it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Beth. Thank you for your submission.
Thank you for your time. Have a good day. Bye.
Our next submitter.